So hello everyone, we are here with Professor Yanagizawa-Drott from the University of Zurich that just presented this paper called Long Range Growth, Economic Development in the Global Networks of Airlinks at the last Novafrica Seminar. Thank you very much for accepting to talk to us. And first of all, we'd like you to briefly explain us the paper you just presented at Novafrica Seminar.
Sure. So briefly, the paper is trying to understand how the increase, just a little bit of background, over the last few decades there's been an explosion in air travel, especially at long distances, right? And so now you can go, we think this makes it, part of globalization that's very important, potentially, an important phenomenon, and that hasn't really been studied from an economic viewpoint. So basically now people are flying from a place like Lisbon to a place like Cape Town or Jakarta or Shanghai in an unprecedented manner compared to before. And this creates, a lot of room for social interactions between people of different cultures, of different economic backgrounds. As an economist, we're interested in this in particular because we want to understand how it affects economic outcomes and maybe fosters economic growth, broadly speaking. And one reason we could expect this to happen maybe is, urban economics has taught us that, face-to-face interactions could potentially be very important for fostering productivity. Knowledge transmission, for example, could be fostered if people meet face-to-face. It could also help facilitate if some people have ideas, but they lack capital. And if people come together and meet face-to-face and build trust, maybe that facilitates transfer of capital for people that have ideas or business opportunities to those that have capital. So you can think mechanisms like that could be at play. And if you talk to business people, everybody knows business people travel a lot. And they probably do this for good reasons, because they want to, take advantage of business opportunities. So basically we study how the evolution of long-distance flights, so basically these are flights that are 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 miles apart or long, how this affects economic activity between places. So if a place like Lisbon gets connected to a lot of places like Jakarta or Cape Town, does that affect business relationships between Lisbon and Jakarta and Cape Town? So that's one type of analysis that we're running. Second, and there we show just briefly that it increases business links measured primarily as foreign direct investment, that is whether people from one place buy firms or invest in firms in these other places. And we use what we think is a very nice identification strategy for that, which is exploiting that there are regulations that discontinuously change the cost of long distance flights above and below 6,000 miles. So it's cheaper to fly an airplane slightly below 6,000 miles compared to slightly above 6,000 miles. This is the difference between what's called long-haul flights and ultra-long-haul flights. So that's sort of the first type of result, the city pair analysis. We also do what you may call like a city-level analysis. As a city gets more connections to other places around the world, does that city or does that place grow economically? And we use satellite night lights to measure this from 1992 to 2010. And basically we show that if you look, say, within 100 miles of a city, when the city gets more connections to the rest of the world, again using a similar strategy as I just mentioned, there's more economic growth. What's interesting though, as we find if you look beyond 100 miles from the city, the effects dissipate over distance, which is expected, but they never turn negative. So that means that there isn't just pure reallocation of economic activity from say rural areas to urban areas. And there's in fact no population movement that we can detect in our data. So that's basically our second set of results. And if I'm just going to summarize the paper, that's basically it. That we find that these links matter a whole lot for economic activity. It fosters economic growth. It fosters business links across places around the world. We then also do investigate some additional questions like whether it helps convergence or divergence around the world. So are poor countries particularly benefiting from this, or is it particularly benefiting, say, middle-income countries or high-income countries and so on?
So, and regarding exactly this last point, during your presentation, you mentioned that one of the downsides of the increasing in airlinks could be the increase in inequality. We would like you to explain a little bit better the mechanism behind how could this happen.
Sure. So, I mean, what I've told you so far are the average effects. So if you take all the places around the world that we studied, which is basically all the entire world. But if we break down the data, we see first of all that these long distance flights, the increase that we see is happening not to and from poor places around the world, so low income countries. It's happening, for middle income countries and high income countries. Okay, and these foreign direct investments, the increase in business links is happening also, in the group of high income and middle income countries. So we do see increase in foreign direct investments from high-income countries in particular to middle-income countries. So it helps explain, so these connections foster the flow of capital for rich countries to poor countries, which is sort of a classical question in development economics, why that doesn't happen to the extent we would see. It also helps to explain why we don't see it to the low-income countries, because they are completely left out of this process, at least in terms of our data in our context. So they don't get more long-distance flights. There's no effect on foreign direct investments and so on. So it's the high and middle income countries that grow. So it fosters convergence there between the two, because the middle income countries grow more than the high income. Think of the Chinas and the Brazils of the world. Whereas the sort of the Ugandas and the Congos of the world are just completely left out. So they are, the difference is now even bigger in terms of economic activity and incomes.
Okay, and to measure economic growth, you mentioned you used an instrumental variable that was the satellite night lights. Could you let us know how the idea for this instrument...
Well, the instrument is not satellite night lights, right? The instrument is distance between, the 6,000 miles apart of cities. Satellite night lights is the outcome in terms of economic activity.
Exactly. Could you let us know how this idea came up to use this?
Sure. I mean, it's I've often asked these questions for different papers. Where did the idea for the identification strategy come up? And I guess it's always hard to pinpoint like one exact moment, kind of an aha moment. But I think in this case, I was talking to my co-author, and I have been thinking about I wanted to write a paper, on this topic. I knew I wanted to write it, but I just couldn't figure out like what the good identification strategy was. But I said, we were talking, and I said there must be, because I knew about the technological advances over these last few decades. That is, that there have been new airplanes that fly longer and cheaper. And so initially we were thinking about these technological constraints for different distances. But as we were reading up on this, actually we found that regulation plays a big role when you look at distances. So the instrument is basically a combination of that. Yes, there have been these new airplanes that can fly very long and cheaply. But if they want to fly above 6,000 miles, it's still this regulation of ultra-long-haul flights, which makes it more costly above 6,000 miles. So then we look for this discontinuity, which we, thought might be there, and sure enough, it was there. So that's kind of how that evolved in this conversation of how can you sort of find a good instrument there.
Yeah. We find the data you're using is very interesting, and also for us we are young researchers, and we always tend to rely on GDP data to measure economic growth.
Yeah.
And this measure is a very aggregate measure.
Sure.
So we would like to know your opinion on how you think that this type of micro level data that you are using can contribute to studies in the subject of development economics.
No, I think it depends on kind of what project you're envisioning. For some questions, you might want to use country level data, but for some other projects like this, you don't necessarily want to use country level data because it's not necessarily the most obvious unit of analysis. So in our case, we were really interested in even within countries, different locations. As a place within a country gets more connected to the rest of the world, does this place grow relative to other places in the country that are further away? And how do the effects dissipate with distance and so on? So if you're, for example, interested in kind of within country spatial allocation of economic activity, you can't use GDP data, right? So you have to use something else. So there's good data on satellite night lights at a high spatial resolution. There's good data on population at a high spatial resolution. And if you know ArcGIS, for example, a software that can deal with spatial data, there are lots of different things that you can study, which is very nice. And often, especially if you want to use data from around the world, which could be hard to get if you want to use survey data or that kind of stuff, So yeah, I think we're just in the beginning of using these kinds of data sets. There's been an explosion in the number of papers that use it, so I expect that to continue.
Okay, we just have a final question, and although it's not related to the study you presented, we heard about your work on the community health delivery project in Uganda, and this is actually related to one of the ongoing projects that Novafrica is working on, and we are very interested in knowing your opinion, what is behind the success of this project.
So yes, we have studied they're called community health promoters, which I think is different from the typical community health worker program, which is often voluntary or run in conjunction with the government. This is a very different model. This is more based on a business type model, where community health promoters can make money by providing goods and services to the community. So they sell basic health products like bed nets or malaria pills or rehydration salt and so on. They are also incentivized, so they have an economic incentive because they can buy at a cheap price from the NGO that is running this program called Living Goods. And then they sell it to households at a profit for each good. Right? So they have this economic incentive. They also have economic incentives to provide timely services, for example, around pregnancies and childbirth. So if they can get households to, say, go to clinics and so on, there are certain incentives there too. So it's sort of a holistic program in that sense, and we randomized this across villages, followed them for 3+ years, and found these pretty big effects in terms of mortality. And it's, exactly what's driving this thing is hard to kind of tease out with a project like this. But it's certainly true that this kind of package seemed to have done a whole lot of good in terms of reducing child mortality. So we find something like a 25% reduction in child mortality, which is quite unique, I would say. Which, so I don't know what kind of... you said you're working on some community health worker program, but one thing that I would look carefully into is sort of what incentives do they have to provide these timely goods and services. Women that probably have a lot of other things going on in life. Maybe they have some job to take care of, maybe they have children to take care of, and so on and so forth. So that's one aspect, just the incentive part. The other part is the sustainability part, which is this model was set up so that it's sustainable, i.e. these women, since they have this economic incentive, they would want to continue to work. And of course, if they want to quit, they can do so, but then they can hire another woman. And many women want to take this job. Also, the NGO itself sells all the goods at a small profit, actually. So they buy in bulk from suppliers, but then sell it cheaply to the community health promoter. But for many of these goods, they actually make a little profit as well. So that helps with the bottom line for them as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor.
Sure. You're welcome.